The moment you open your mouth, you tell the world exactly how to hurt you. You think you are communicating, you think you are building a connection, but in the eyes of a strategist, you are doing something else entirely. You are handing over the blueprints of your mind. Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who wrote the Manual on Power, understood a brutal truth that modern society has forgotten: the most dangerous person in the room is never the one shouting. It is never the one trying to prove they are right, but rather the one who listens, watches, and says nothing. Because while everyone else is exhausting themselves trying to be understood, the silent observer is gathering the ammunition to destroy them. We live in a world that is terrified of the quiet, where everyone is constantly broadcasting, explaining, and justifying. Silence acts as a mirror, and when the noise stops, people are forced to be alone with themselves, which for most is a torture chamber. When you stay silent, you create a vacuum, and the human mind abhors a vacuum. When you look at someone with a neutral expression and say nothing, their brain enters a state of panic, assuming you are judging them or calculating your next move. To relieve that tension and anxiety, they will talk, reveal the truth, and bid against themselves, offering concessions they never intended to make. You likely have a habit that destroys your authority and makes you look weak: over-explaining, known in dark psychology as the JADE. Technique: justify, argue, defend, explain. When you explain yourself, you are implicitly granting the other person authority over you, placing them in the position of a judge who gets to decide if your words have value. A king does not explain his decrees to a peasant, and high-status individuals do not drown the room in words. Every time you justify your existence, you are acting like a defendant on trial begging for validation. In the laws of power, the more you explain, the less dominant you appear. The more words you use to prop up your actions, the less stable they look, acting like scaffolding that tells the world your character cannot stand on its own. When you make a decision, own it. If you make a mistake, acknowledge it, but do not explain it. This constant need to talk also leads to the liquid confession, where you spill your secrets, your fears, and your weaknesses to people who have not earned them. You think you are building trust, but you are handing them loaded weapons, giving them leverage that they will use against you when the relationship inevitably changes. Machiavelli warned that men are fickle, and to rely on their silence is madness. When you give someone a secret, you become their servant, because they hold a piece of your destruction in their pocket. To master this, you must cultivate information asymmetry and become a black box. Absorb everything, but give back nothing except vague reflections. When you tell people everything about your life, you are illuminating your position and turning on the floodlights in the middle of a dark field where everyone can see you, but you can see no one. By remaining an unreadable void, people will project their own strength onto you, assuming you are smarter, more connected, and more dangerous than you actually are. Let them build a monument to you in their minds, and do not open your mouth to shatter the illusion. To achieve this, you must adopt the psychology of the sniper. The sniper's first rule is concealment, and the moment he reveals his position, even if he is the most lethal weapon on the battlefield, he becomes a target. When you constantly broadcast your life, your plans, and your emotions, you are firing a flare gun into the night sky, telling the world exactly where you are vulnerable. You must operate in the shadows, because the threat you can see is a challenge, but the threat you cannot see is a curse. Then there is the power of the analytical pause. In Western culture, a gap in conversation feels like a threat, so when someone insults us or asks a trap question, our instinct is to blurt out the first thing that comes to mind. But power lives in the gap. When someone hits you with a rude comment, a demanding question, or a blatant lie, do nothing. Look at them, lock eyes, and count to 4 in your head. 4 seconds of silence feels like an hour during an argument, forcing the other person to sit in the discomfort of their own aggression. They will often stutter, rephrase their insult, or back down entirely, because you have refused to give them the reaction they crave. After the silence, you do not even need a clever comeback, because the silence was the comeback. You have used time as a weapon, seizing the frame and showing that you are not reactive, but processing and judging. This is the void technique, where you become a black hole that absorbs their energy and gives nothing back. We live in an outrage economy where your anger is a commodity, and people will constantly try to provoke you to hijack your amygdala. When you react to someone, you give them power. When you get angry, you are transferring your energy to them and funding their relevance. If you get angry, you validate their chaos and prove that their words have the power to alter your heart rate. But when you look at them with absolute flat neutrality, you signal that their emotional storm did not even get you wet. This is weaponized apathy and the gray rock doctrine. You must become a surface so smooth, uninteresting, and cold that their manipulation slides right off. When a toxic person attempts to insult you, do not defend yourself. Hold eye contact for 3 seconds too long, do not blink, and then turn back to your work without saying a word. You treat their insult like background noise or a pop-up ad, destroying their psychological frame because they need your reaction to validate their existence. When you deny them that reaction, you erase them, and in a world where everyone is screaming to be seen, the man who says nothing is the loudest thing in the room. When you stop reacting, be prepared for the extinction burst. In behavioral psychology, an extinction burst is the sudden, violent spike in behavior that happens right before a conditioned response dies. When you start ignoring manipulative people, they will not just fade away, they will escalate, attack your reputation, and try to bait you with guilt.
This is the critical moment where most people fail and panic, thinking they need to explain themselves to keep the peace.
Do not break your silence, because the extinction burst is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of success, meaning the parasite is losing its grip on you and panicking. If you respond, you teach them that screaming louder will eventually force your compliance. Hold the line, let your silence be your bodyguard, and let them exhaust themselves trying to get a rise out of you.
When they are panting and desperate for any acknowledgement, you simply smile a cold, detached smile and walk away.
Furthermore, silence artificially inflates the value of your words through the law of scarcity. If your words are everywhere, they are worth nothing, but the person who hoards their words like gold forces the room to stop and lean in when they finally speak. Basic economics rules the human psyche. If the supply of a resource is infinite like air, it is vital but has no market value. When you are always available and always talking, you flood the market with your presence and your value drops to zero. To become expensive, you must become a diamond, which means you must become useless to those who cannot afford you and introduce friction into your access. The throne belongs to the one who can keep his counsel and endure the silence that others flee from.
Machiavelli was not writing for the masses, he was writing for the outlier who is willing to do what is necessary, not what is polite.
Silence is your most dangerous weapon because it is the only weapon that cannot be disarmed. They can take your money, they can take your status, and they can slander your name, but they cannot take your silence unless you willingly give it to them.
The world is a distraction designed to keep you weak, reactive, and asleep.
Shut up, step out of the noise, and watch how the world bends to you. If you are ready to step into the architect level, subscribe. See you in the shadows. Not, America Pazari Hedeflendigei Eisen Sesslender Metni Ingelis Olarak, 15 to 20 Dakikolik per video Surasini dal Durakak Felsify die Rinlicht ve tam Estetigen Formata Genisla Tilmaster. Baseraler Dillarim.